All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll be joined by a few more people in the next couple minutes, but that's okay. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this Digital Analytics Program Learning Series, a very different style of webinar than we've done before. My name's Tim Loudon. I'm the Program Manager for the Digital Analytics Program here at GSA, and I'm joined by a bunch of very special guests today who I'll introduce to you in just a minute. Let me just say off the bat that we're using Zoom here, and I know some of you have called in and some of you are on Zoom. When you log in, you should be auto-muted. And I would ask, if possible, that other than our 4 guest speakers today, if everybody could stay muted and not unmute themselves, that would probably make things go much smoother. I'm sure you've all been on big calls before where people are accidentally unmuted, and you end up getting some interesting noises. In fact, I hear somebody that's unmuted right now, so if you could mute. So let me tell you about today's session. Basically, in the beginning of the year, every year, myself and my colleague Freddie Blicker from the DAP team, who's joining us today as well, we send out an email and we kind of ask all of you, what are some things that you'd like us to cover in our trainings this year? And we got a really interesting response this year from one of our guests, Wayne Witten, who joins us from Social Security Administration. And he said, I'd really like to hear how analytics are managed or governed at various different agencies. And we thought that was a really, really interesting proposal. And so we're going to try to address some of that today. Of note, the discussion today is not going to be DAP specific. So unlike some of our other trainings where we focus particularly on the Digital Analytics Program Google Analytics account, today is going to be more broad. We're going to be discussing sort of analytics in general. It might be the DAP account, it might be your own individual Google Analytics accounts, it might be a bunch of other tools, GTM, visualization tools, and so on and so forth. But the idea is that we just get information about all sort of analytics related information. Another thing is that we are not trying to make any prescriptions or judgments based on anything we hear. This is designed solely to be an informational discussion, to hear how other agencies do things. And maybe you can take some of the things you hear today on this call and translate them to how things work at your agency. But we absolutely also understand that every agency has its own policies that its employees must abide to. So with that said, let me introduce you to our 4 guests today. So as I noted, we're joined by Wayne Witten, who's a senior web developer at the Social Security Administration. We also have with us Lee Burke, who is an Internet Communications Advisor and Web Content Manager at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service at the Department of Treasury. We have Tracy Saunders, who is an IT specialist from the FDA. And we're also joined by Sam Bronson, Digital Analytics Program Manager at HHS. So these folks have very, very kindly agreed to take an hour of their time to talk about how analytics are handled at their agency, and we thank them for that. Before I start asking them a bunch of questions, I'm going to give them each a few seconds just to kind of talk about what their main role is at the agency and how they're connected to analytics. So Sam, do you want to start us off?
Sure, thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I manage our digital analytics program at HHS, but I'm in the Office of Secretary, so it's kind of a dual role. On the one hand, it means metrics and analytics for the digital products in our portfolio here in the Office of Secretary, like hhs.gov, stopbullying.gov, and a number of other sites. And then the other side is, HHS being a very federated or decentralized organization with large divisions like CDC and FDA or NIH. The other role we play is sort of the program for the department. That doesn't mean that those divisions don't have their own programs. Some of them might, but in terms of managing kind of shared work group and shared experiences, we facilitate that as well as some implementation services for them. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Lee, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. Sorry, it took me a second to get off mute. Sorry about that. Well, basically, as you mentioned, I'm the web content manager and internet communication advisor on the web team at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. And of course, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service is the financial manager for the government, doing payments, collections, accounting for the entire government, and also running the auctions for Treasury securities, selling savings bonds. So we have doing shared services in several business lines. So we have a wide variety of functions. And we have about 5 major websites that we manage. And we use the digital analytics program to evaluate the success of our websites, how popular some of our pages are, and so on and so forth. So that's my role.
Great, thanks. Trey Sean, how
Sure.
about you?
Hello again, and thank you. So again, my name is Tracy Saunders, and I am an IT specialist in FDA. One of the main things of my title is analytics. However, I also assist in web development, 5-way compliance. I guess you can say the list can kind of go on in the aspect of IT-related content. But one of the things that we do with DAP is leverage DAP because of one of its main functionalities is that it's, I guess, the premium version. We do have various other analytical tools within FDA as well. So I always loved and enjoyed to assist in, I guess, conversation with Tim and others with the DAP team. So again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. And last but not least, Wayne, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Took myself off mute, and I learned from my colleague over there. Hello, everybody. My name is Wayne Witten, and I've been a web developer for many years now. I probably shouldn't have said senior because that kind of gives it away, but I would say that my role is not just development, but really more of an advisor, kind of a solution provider, because my team not only deals with what you see on SSA.gov, but how it got there, when it got there, everything that revolves around the informational side of the website. And that's really what I'm representing here first and foremost. We do have another part of our website which is called e-services, electronic services, and that's where all of the claims, whether they be for retirement or disability, that's where they go. So you can think of us, or my team specifically, as those that develop all the information to actually get you to those online services. So that's kind of a nutshell.
Great, thanks, Wayne. All right, so we got introductions. I think we're just about ready to jump into the questions here. One thing I did forget to note early on is that for those of us who are on the Zoom platform, you can direct any questions you might have into the chat box. And hopefully I'll take a break at about the halfway point to address a few questions from the audience and direct them to our speakers. And then if we have time, we'll try to do it again at the end. Of note, this is only an hour-long call, so I'm gonna jump in right now and start asking some of the questions that we have prepared and are interested in learning from our speakers. So I think the first question is sort of the elephant in the room, as you might say, in terms of the big question all agencies struggle with in terms of analytics governance is how exactly is your analytics governance structured? So is it more of a centralized approach? For those of you who are the speakers, do you work in a department where you centralize a lot of the rulemaking or approval or management of these accounts, or is it more decentralized, sort of with the individual website owners or content teams? And how does it work with formal governance in your agency? So just kind of speak broadly on what the setup is at your agency. So let's see. I'm just going to pick names to call you out, and we'll see what everyone says. So why don't we start with Lee?
Okay, great. Well, I got myself off mute faster that time.
No
So we have really we have a hybrid situation at this time. At this point, we started with having the web team in legislative and public affairs do all of the, or a lot of the reports. But then slowly but surely, we began adding users in the program areas. And so now we have a healthy number of users in the program areas that have access to the Google Analytics through DAP. We also have some contractors. A lot of the contractors, I think Booz Allen, they must have at least 20 people that have access. With our partners, the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis, they also have DAP access. There's some program areas that still want the web team to do the reports, and so we try to service them as well. But I would say it's a hybrid at this point. As far as governance, we don't have anything too formal at this point. We have a working group for the website that we work with, and analytics comes in there. We have a social media squad, and the person who runs our social media squad uses and brings up analytics all the time, which is great. And we are also thinking of starting a working group for people who use the DAP, the Google Analytics, to see kind of what they're doing, how they're using it, do they have any problems and issues and so forth. So I think that'll be, and sort of share information. Maybe some people have some great ideas that we didn't know about. So anyway, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the working group idea is a really cool way to get some information sharing that may not necessarily be a super formal way, but even if you can meet once a quarter or once a month or something, that sounds like it's a worthwhile endeavor. Cool. Sam, right. I know you have a really interesting setup at HHS. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, we sort of have a hybrid approach as well, mainly dictated by the federated nature of HHS. But I would say, like, in terms of, I would separate like the data management from access to data. Open access to data, absolutely. Anyone in the department who wants access to our analytics data gets that access, provided they do not use a Gmail account. They register their work email, their contractor, the contractor email, so that we can manage it, because the Gmail thing is almost impossible to know who's who. But other than that,
I'm with you there. I'm with you.
Yeah, right. I'm sure you feel that pain. The worst setup, I'd say, is it starts at for me, the domain level. If you have a single domain and multiple, let's say, tag management containers on there, or multiple offices or entities managing different parts of the domain, that's, from my perspective, abysmal, because you have taken sessions that can live across the domain and chop them up, so your data's bad. So, for us, it starts there. So what we do is essentially manage any website that's in our environment here in Office of Secretary. So that's most of the websites in the Office of Secretary. And we have MOUs with anyone who we host saying, we manage your analytics, we manage the container that fires things, we manage and choose the voice of customer tool. But because you can't have multiple surveys, obviously, thrown up against users. But outside of that, if it works and they can still have it and it's not intrusive, we'll fire it for them. We'll deploy, we'll set up an additional duplicate Google Analytics account if they want it configured differently, as long as our account and the DAP account continuously fires. So that's our OS space. But for the larger department, it's sort of a mixed bag. We would love to host everyone, but we don't. A lot of the smaller divisions, we do admin their analytics completely, and for good portions of NIH, we do the same. But there are other, parts of NIH who have some specialized sites and their own program money, and they have their own thing going on, and that happens in CDC as well. So it's a mix there, which I think is good in one sense, because they do have different, it's like that. The states versus the federal, they're going to experiment in their own way, and they should be able to do that. But if they don't have the resources, then we happily come in, implement, and admin. If we admin, though, we do have some, governance requirements around that if they push and they want to play in the space, then we'll let them have edit rights to the tag management system, but not publish rights. We're going to review anything before it goes live. If they want to do it on their own, that's fine. But as soon as we're hosting it for them, we have that sort of responsibility that we're going to maintain some consistency. So when I was at EPA 5 years ago, because it was a smaller agency and it was not as federated, we were able to go, have a single container across the entire website, including the regions, and that worked well there. But HHS being so large and having such prominent divisions, we have to sort of work around that. So
yeah, that's a really intriguing setup. I like what you said, kind of, if a portion of HHS doesn't have the resources to do something on their own, you're there as sort of a team that has the subject matter knowledge and can admin things. But for those of the subdivisions or the operating divisions that have those sort of capabilities, they can do things on their own. I've always kind of felt that, Sam, that you kind of do very similarly to what we do with DAP, except on a more technical level and only for one agency. But boy, that agency has a lot of moving parts. So really, really interesting. So speaking of operating divisions that may have the capabilities to do things on their own, operating divisions of HHS, this kind of segues nicely over to Tracy, who heads up a lot of analytics work for FDA, which obviously, as we all know, is a part of HHS. But why don't you tell us about how things are structured at FDA, Tracy?
Thank you again. And ultimately, we are in the same sense of a hybrid source. And I guess I should have first introduced myself as a part of the internet and intranet branch. So here, we deal with the break fix aspect. We also assist in the review and interpretation. Whereas we also have a Office of External Affairs, OEA, who also assist in maintaining specific roles, such as providing suggestions, looking at the data mining or whatnot. And then we also have another tier of centered program offices where they also have their own analytical folks that I guess you would say provide feedback in their specific centers. So it truly helps in my aspect, because in the beginning of our time, we had over, let's say, 160,000 web content items for FDA.gov. We also deal with access data. We also have our internal sites. So when we break it down in this specific style of tier, it helps us to understand what analytics is working, what analytics isn't. So also in the system, the training aspects, and also, right now our analytic tools are evolving, which is also pretty interesting as well. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting to just sort of get perspectives on how things run everywhere. Wayne, at SSA, are things more centralized there or decentralized?
I would say that they're still more centralized, but this is an evolving process for us. And it's because Google Analytics started within the Office of Communications, so it's kind of the hub, naturally speaking. All the content on SSA.gov is, ultimately OCOM's responsibility. That's our policy. Now, in terms of the measurement of what we're dealing with which is of course involving Google Analytics and really any kind of analytics that we use, including 4C, we have our different deputy commissioners with their different roles take on their parts. So, relating back to what all the other panelists have said, this is our version of hybrid. So it's a cross between decentralizing at times, because there's just no way our office can accommodate the whole enterprise. So we do our own reporting, and if we have the ability to help out the reporting for other deputy commissioners, that's fine. We go ahead and do that. But at times resources are a little too much, and we have to rely on the decentralization, or the other side of the hybrid, where the content people themselves and their respective, web developers or coders, they do their part when they can as well. Like I said, it's evolving, so we may find that is going to change sometime soon. We'll have to see, but it's really good to hear the other panelists and what they're going through, because we fed in one way or another, so it's nice to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good for everyone to hear that we're all sort of facing the same types of hurdles. I know anytime I have conversations with agencies where I kind of get the sense that everyone's in the same boat, it makes you feel not alone. So my next question, sort of dovetailing off of this one, for those of you, I mean, I think everyone kind of said they have some sort of like a hybrid setup. So for those of you, especially those that said you have many users and they're across the agency, is there a way for you to communicate with all analytics, I guess, stakeholders, or is it more ad hoc? Like, as an example, if there were some sort of policy that was going to say, obviously here at DAP, we specialize in Google Analytics. So if somebody was going to say, across the agency, we need to make sure this specific setting is turned on or off on all Google Analytics accounts. Is there an easy way to do that, or is that more difficult? Is it more ad hoc? Wayne, I'll kick it back to you to start.
Yeah, an interesting development, because what we were talking about in the waiting room was that we just finished our kickoff meeting for our enterprise governance for at least the informational part of our website. And from that emanates the proliferation of governance in other related areas, GA being one of them. So we have our website development and our measurement tied loosely together. That's still evolving. But I would say, another point to go back to is one of the, I think, items that Sam brought up with Google Tag Manager, and maybe some of the other panelists. It's really important to strive towards that, because right now, our deployment, which is part of that communication path that you're talking about, we have the communication path at a technical level. We also have it at an executive level for the different purposes, or I should say respective purposes. So with the execution or the delivery, deployment, however you want to phrase it, for the actual tracking part of it, that's all technical. But now, in order for that technical piece to survive and be successful, you have to have the recognition, the support, and that is all part of that communication channel. So at least in my eyes, with the enterprise-wide governance that we have, that's our go-to channel. And if it has to do with decision-making, I would say that gets bumped up the chain of command to the executive. So it really depends on what needs to be communicated.
Sure, interesting. So I think what I heard basically is that there's sort of an executive level, maybe list or functionality where they can all be notified of something, and then it's more of a trickle down to the necessary employees based on the executive knowing, the supervisor knowing who should get that information. But there's also, for the technical folks, I guess more probably specifically web developers, there's a way to communicate with them. Interesting. Trayshawn, is it similar at FDA? Is there some sort of like listserv for analytics related folks, or is it more along the lines of web development specific, kind of like Wayne just mentioned?
Great question. And for us, we actually have a web analytic user group distribution list. So anyone who actually has access to Google Analytics or utilize our analytic tools, they have the ability to access our SharePoint. So if you ever request access to our SharePoint, then we give them the ability to add it to our distribution list. So if there's ever an issue, say if Google Analytics isn't working, God forbid, knock on wood, we send a message out through the distribution list. We may add something onto SharePoint, and we send the message out. And then if there's additional conversation, we use our governance council meetings that we have. And then we also have like a weekly message that goes out through our Office of External Affairs. So we also add additional information through that funnel of I guess, communication. So we have a variety of ways to contact our analytical users. Now, I think there was also other individuals who were talking about the actual analytics and having them report or having the analytical users report specific metrics to individuals, and that's a different play. I'm sure that those users have another way of I should say, communicating through their management as well. So,
sure.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's really cool that you have so many different avenues. So there's kind of like a newsletter that goes out that you can get information in there, but then also there's a separate group that folks can be involved in. Cool. Sam, so I based on your former response here, I know that it's maybe a little bit fragmented for you, being that you and your office support some folks, but not all folks. For those that you are supporting, is there a way for you to reach them all?
Yeah, so I definitely, agree with what Wayne said and the importance of a tag management system. So the part of me that wants to manage the entire department is the part that wants to know that we're controlling the settings and the filters and are aware of issues like non-canonical links that need to be aggregated, and we're staying in tune with the privacy changes in the EU to make setting changes on our end, and we are updating our privacy policy if we're using the double-click cookie. So it's not as plug and play as most users would think, and they don't have to think about it. All they need to know is, hey, is it accurate and can I access it? And that's how I'd like it to be. So if we need to make a change to the DAP setting, we can do that across half the agency through Tag Manager, and for the other half that we aren't managing, we would have to communicate down through our digital council or our analytics work group and hope for the best. And there will be some, right? And there will be some groups who receive that information and they implement the settings and they stay and have a tight ship on their own. And there'll be others who don't. So it makes it more difficult on that end. That's why I really push for a centralized system in terms of the settings and the admin, and then an open system in terms of data access and users getting their reports and that sort of thing. So I do regret that if a setting change occurs and it's important enough to need to be communicated to the entire department, that there's no way I can say for sure that it'll get implemented outside of the sites that we manage.
Sure, I gotcha. So, but basically, you're like, in the sense that as centralized as you can be, if you have strong centralization, a lot of times that decreases the need for communication about a lot of issues because you know that your team's handling it. That's a good point. I hadn't actually considered that, although it also plays into, sort of what you just mentioned mirrors itself with DAP a lot. We could obviously control the DAP GA settings, but one thing that really strikes me as mirroring your situation is for the folks that locally host the DAP code. Every time we come up with a new version, we're on a spree trying to find out how to notify everybody to change it. And in a lot of cases, just speaking in our own experience for communication, the best level of communication we've got is the DAP listserv. And so I hope most of you on the call are on the DAP listserv. Some of you probably have opted to take yourself off the listserv, and that's a problem we run into, is that if you unsubscribe from our listserv, we have no way of contacting all the folks across the many agencies to say, hey, there's a new code version, and there might be feature upgrades or bug fixes or something. And if you're locally hosting it rather than using our central host, it's difficult to reach all those people. So makes sense. Finally, Lee, why don't you tell us about your communication methods?
I would say it's more ad hoc, although we do use the social media working group and the website working group, and potentially this additional working group that we're going to hopefully form for the analytics folks. And actually from that list for the working group for analytics, we could create a listserv. That's a great idea. We do send once a month to our senior executives a report on the top 5 pages for several of our websites. So we communicate the data to our senior executives and to anybody who reads their report. But I did get some good ideas from what some of the other people said, like the idea of a SharePoint site for the analytics users is a great idea that one of the other respondents mentioned. So
awesome. Well, you just totally led me into a perfect segue into the next question, is when you were talking about sort of the reporting aspect. So not communication about necessarily, settings or admin functions or changes, but reporting, and particularly something that interests me from my experience working with agencies with Google Analytics is how much sort of, people say managing up, I guess, per se, but how people do that reporting up to supervision and what that kind of looks like. So the next question I'd like to pose is basically, how do you all report up to management and what works for you? Are there visualizations or dashboards that you find helpful? I mean, I think commonly, most of us find that, people in high-level positions above us are very busy, and you can't sit them down and have an hour of their time exclusively to talk about analytics. So what are the methods that you use to communicate reporting or data to senior leadership, and what have you found that works for you? Let's jump down to Tracy to start first.
Thank you. I couldn't take myself off of mute quick enough. So it all depends on the individual. So I always call them stakeholders. So dealing with analytics for quite some time, I understand each individual, whereas some reports may take just a quick snapshot with a PowerPoint presentation, or we get it down and deeper into like an Excel spreadsheet. And then we also utilize our Office of External Affairs. Like we have a Web Governance Council meeting, again, that's hosted every month. We also utilize that platform to discuss or present certain analytical changes. So it all depends on the actual stakeholder. So we try to use every platform that we can possibly get a hold of. Because like you stated, due to the level of knowledge of analytics, some users may just look at page views, whereas I'm trying to teach and promote other avenues, such as utilizing bounce rates and trying to get into that notion of what's good metrics and what's bad metrics. But I hope that helped.
Yeah, well, that's, a discussion for the ages, what's good metrics and what's bad metrics. And I know that, Freddie and I, in most of our trainings, we try to, as much as we can, hit home that every website should probably have different goals, and you really need to be strategizing around that. And it's difficult sometimes to communicate those things, in a way that is easy. Everybody wants for you to be able to walk into a room and say, hey, we have X number of page views or X bounce rate, and that means we're succeeding. But unfortunately, that's not the reality. I'll jump back over to Lee, since you had kind of led me into this question. What are the kinds of methods that you all use to communicate to your supervision about this data?
Well, besides, in addition to the top 5 pages, we do have some visualizations in the same report that our social media manager person does, and she does a great job on that. So I think, pictures always worth 1,000 words or numbers. So that's I think very helpful. I know that a couple of the reports that we produce for the offices for our shared service area and our revenue collections, they use it to give to their senior managers to show, how their web pages are doing, for example, or how their downloads of particular training videos are doing, and so forth. So I think it is used to report up to the senior managers about the success or lack thereof of the web pages, or your web sections and so forth. So
great, thanks for that insight.
Sure.
Sam, I know you use quite a few tools. I've spoken to you before about things that you've used, are there specific things that you found that have worked better than others when trying to communicate, data or reporting?
For management, for sure, we usually use Tableau because it's usually around a project or a migration or an effort where there's a question to be answered. So they have a goal in mind. We may help them craft that goal, but then we're trying to answer a success question, and it usually requires data outside of Google Analytics. It may include Google Analytics, but because it's multiple sources, usually to answer most questions we have, then it just seems easier to use something like Tableau, but it could be Google Data Studio or any other platform that's going to allow you to pull in, and possibly transform a bit different data sources, so we can kind of tell the story that we want, and not, kind of be constrained by one software.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that you said you need something that can bring in multiple data sources, and I super love that you said we try to answer questions by telling stories. I think that's something that that gets lost very often. People just want to know. People think, in the sense of Google Analytics, from my perspective, people think we have a website, is it succeeding, rather than asking a question: are we achieving our goals? Are we getting people to sign up for a newsletter, or are we getting the information to folks, or are we getting applications, or so on and so on? So really, really interesting and great points there, Sam. Thanks. Wayne, how about you? What do you all use to report up to management?
I would say it goes back to what Tracy said. It really depends. Most of it is ad hoc, but before I actually answer completely, I want to reiterate the issue that you just covered with Sam about, kind of training for the story versus the question at hand, because that is what I'm trying to impress on management and executives alike. Whenever they ask for something like hit count, well, it's not a hit, it's a direction, and that's not a quote from me. So if you can hopefully answer any of your reporting needs in the form of, what's more to the question, what kind of story can you get out of this? In other words, I usually try to say, okay, what kind of trend analysis is going to go with this? Because it eventually gets to that point. But I guess to go back to the earlier part of the question, it depends on what part of the tool, what part of the Google Analytics we're using. It also depends on whether we're using other parts of the 360 suite. For example, if we're using Optimize with it, if we're using anything else. There's also, I guess, a discipline part of the question, and that is exactly how much of this answer relates to the marketing discipline that goes with all this analytical data, all this tool supplied data. So when you're talking about grabbing information from all these different sources, what kind of marketing story are you working towards? That's really my question. And then if I have enough pieces of that for myself to answer the specific question that I'm asked for reporting purposes, I can have that very easily, I should say relatively easily and more quickly. But if it's more on the terms of, let's say, a bigger picture, and we're taking on a new goal in Google Analytics, or even a new conversion point, what exactly does that mean? What exactly is the impact to that on the rest of the marketing picture? So that's where I think we need to have more than just the marketing discipline involved. It's also the content discipline and how it's related to that marketing, to say, all right, let's try to figure out what kind of action items go with this particular finding, or whatever problem or opportunity it needs to be answered in the long run there.
Really interesting. Yeah, I'm with you. I think, along those lines, the best, figuring out the best methods to answer questions and to tell those stories are you know, how we hopefully can achieve the things that we're looking to do. Freddie, I think there are some questions that came through. I know one of them was directed specifically to Sam, but maybe he can elucidate on the call. But do you want to relay some of the questions coming in from chat?
Yeah, sure thing. So we got a couple good questions here. The first is, has anyone used Splunk for doing their analysis?
This is Tracy Saunders. No, I'm sorry.
I was going to say no as well. We use it for alerting for our data warehouse in terms of managing our infrastructure, but I don't think we've done a log file analysis in a long time.
Got it. Anybody else?
I think the silence means nobody's currently using it.
Okay, so
Yeah, we don't use it as fiscal service, so.
got it. Okay. Next question about Tableau. How are folks connecting to your data sources? Are you directly connecting to them or using flat file outputs?
Yeah, I tried to answer in the chat. I'll be really quick. We're building out our data warehouse, so in Amazon Redshift. So we have a lot of sources that are able to be directly connected to that database from Tableau server, but not everything. So, you know, lots of times we're either manually adding data to the database through an S3 bucket, and then pulling it in, or just pulling it right into Tableau manually. So it's a hybrid at the moment.
Very interesting. Anybody else use Tableau on the panel?
We're getting Tableau in the next few days, but we haven't used it up to this point, so it'll be interesting to see how we can use it.
Yeah, so this is Wayne from SSA. Our Tableau use is mostly internal with our enterprise data warehouse. And to use Tableau with GA, it's a conception. You know, it's really not much more than an idea. So I know that it can be done, and I think that's one of the evolving purposes of our not only our support but our maintenance of the tool itself, because we're finding the need to get more of these sources centralized, but I think we're maybe doing it a little opposite in that we're centralizing it internally versus with an external API or anything like that.
Very interesting. Great, thanks for your feedback. Another question, are other teams utilizing any type of heat map tools? If so, which providers?
We do use Crazy Egg at HHS and the OS department.
Great.
And we also use Crazy Eggs as well.
So we've got two Crazy Eggs. Any other folks using heat map tools?
This is Wayne. I just got that question from a couple of folks that know me from my governance groups, and they're asking about Crazy Egg. So looks like we're going to look into it, and I know other agencies use it, so we're in tow.
Great. Just got another question. We were getting a lot of questions here. Sorry, did somebody else have any feedback on the panel?
No, I was going to say we don't use anything of that here either, but I like the name, so I'd like to look into Crazy Egg.
Great. Okay, we've got another question here. What do folks on the panel use for social media metrics and tracking? And do you have any privacy concerns about using any of the heat map tools that were listed just now?
Fiscal service, we use Hootsuite for tracking. And from our social media manager, we are going to be testing integrating Google Analytics with Hootsuite to apply tracking parameters to our links and so forth.
Great.
Same at SSA. We have Hootsuite with a combination of other tools and homegrown things as fundamental as just regular Excel spreadsheets. But yeah, it's centralized with the marketing group.
And we're using Sprinkler, but we have a separate engagement branch, so they sort of manage that, but that's the tool they're using.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for sharing. Freddie, was that most of what we've got here?
Yeah, it's most of the questions. Yeah.
Cool. I know that I saw a question in the chat that I think I asked that person to email us, and hopefully we can try to help them out. But these are great questions. Keep them coming, folks. We have a few more minutes, and at the end, we'll be able to, someone responded, the heat map privacy question.
No concerns.
No concerns. All right. Sam says no concerns. Obviously, I want to make a disclaimer here. With regard to privacy, everybody should work with their own agency's privacy and security office to make sure that they're abiding by that agency's determinations. And none of us are lawyers, so we won't tell you whether or not something's good to use. We'll leave that up to you and your agency. But we know agencies are using them, so we'll say that. Okay. Moving on to some of the other questions that we had here, and I know we're already coming up on time. We've got about 12 minutes left, so we'll see how many more we can answer. I think one that I'm interested in hearing is, do you all have folks that are dedicated analysts? And I know that, for example, a lot of folks have formal titles that are like program analyst or something like that. But in terms of actual day-to-day work, are there people who, for most of their job description, what they're doing is doing data analysis and or reporting, maybe for various different tools? Or is it more of a model where, folks have a lot of different hats on, and analytics, or, in this case, Google Analytics is more just a piece of their work? Why don't we start with Sam on this one?
Sure. So it's part of my time. So half of my time in doing analysis on a minor to moderate level, and then the other half is managing the program. And so the rest is contract supported analysis positions. And any illusions I had that I could do this by myself left a long time ago. And for the for the question that someone asked about, a small agency how they prioritize what to do, because I think it relates to your question, Tim. I was at we did a digital day. We did back in the fall, and I had a desk, people come by and ask questions. And one person came by who was like a manager of some level, maybe upper management, and in that vein, they wanted something summarized. They said, okay, yeah, I enjoyed your talk. I didn't get all of it, but just summarize it for me. What do I need to know to move something forward if I want to get started? And I thought about it, and I was like, it really comes down to you putting a statement of work out there that's not going to be gobbled up by your existing large contractor. And these are just examples, like a Booz or SAIC or you pick them, because they're not analytics specialists. There are now so many companies who just do analytics, and they are available in the GSA schedule. And now that OMB has positioned their footing to small business first, and agencies are doing the same, you have so much opportunities now that you didn't have a few years ago to get that type of specialties support. And I think that's foremost the best thing you can do to get started, because once you have that specialty support, it's so niche that you can expand out from there and get a lot of good recommendations. So yeah, we couldn't do it without contract support.
That's a really, really interesting and valuable point. So I think that's a very salient position there, that is the more you can focus on getting SOWs for specific analytics work. And, I also like what Sam said there. If you don't have the ability to hire, FTE to do it, maybe contracting for having analytics specific work is the way to go, especially when, as Sam noted, there are lots of agencies out there that focus in it. Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I kind of lost what my original question was here. I think the question was if you have dedicated analysts. So let's jump over to Trayshawn. Obviously, Trayshawn, you said analytics is a big portion of your work. Is it just you, or are there others?
Again, this is a beautiful, great question. And so yes, so for me, I'm the designated or dedicated analyst for FDA. However, there's a big team behind me. I also have an amazing team lead. So first, I have to give kudos to that. And we also have the external office affairs. So we do have a collection of dedicated individuals, and then it migrates into like a multiple hat in a sense, whereas people who are dedicated in media and then leverage analytics for that, or web development and then leverage analytics for that. So yes, we have a good collection of users, and yeah, there you have it.
Awesome, thanks. Wayne, how do things look for analysis at SSA?
Yeah, I can't understate how important of a question this is, because I think it involves all of us to some degree. Myself included, being kind of a developer turned architect, that sort of story. The idea that Sam raised about contractor support, yeah, we've done that in the past as well. But I would say that the majority of our analysts are regular FTEs. So I think that might have been what Tracy was talking about. Now, does that mean that they have those actual role titles? No, they don't. It's a marketing team. And within that marketing team, we have a measurement team. And believe it or not, I'm actually not part of that measuring team. I'm aside from that. So in that sense, it's a decentralized type of approach with whatever reporting. It sort of goes back to that question, whatever reporting needs we have. So in terms of the actual role, we do have a dedicated data analyst. And I would say, with everything else considered, I don't know if the role names are actually implemented with where we are, but the functions themselves are certainly carried through the different teams that we have. So I guess in a similar sense, I have a backing of analysts, similar to what Tracy had said. So it's similar here, but I don't think we rely on contractor work as much.
Interesting. So both sides, definitely a mix there. Lee, I know that I missed you for this question, but I think in the essence of time, I'm going to go to you first for my next question, and that is,
Sure.
How do you define success at your agency with regard to analytics, and how do you work towards that?
I think if the analytics are used to make decisions on content for our websites, what web pages get, improved and revised and so forth. So, to me, that's what success, represents, using it for improving the web pages. So it's not a very long answer, but that's what I think really.
No worries. I mean,
that's what we need at this point.
Absolutely. And I think that's at the core of all these analytics products, right? Is that we don't measure things just for the heck of it. We measure things to take action. So I think that's a great goal. Tracy, does it look at would you say that you would add anything to that? What does success look like in terms of analytics for FDA?
I wish you can see me, because I'm constantly keep smiling for these questions. So for FDA, it truly changes depending on the actual center. So let's use food, for example. So there could be a recall page. So in the definement of success for this is a higher bounce rate because of the actual content on that page. And however, on another token, we may count as success as simple traffic. So we develop a report for content and its traffic. I know this sounds kind of crazy, whereas now we're searching for every page that does not contain zero or any traffic at all. So success definitely varies depending on the actual center and also the actual task at hand. So ultimately, to sum it up, for us, it truly does depend. So success, it varies.
I think that's, that's totally understandable. For various different aspects, success changes. And that kind of, it sounds like that kind of leads to sort of the larger goal of what Lee was saying, that various, when you get down to an individual page or section of a site level, different successes might look different, and they ultimately play into, making decisions that help the user. I know we have one more question here, and I'm cutting people out now because we're close to time, but I did want to pose one more question, and I'll pose it to Sam and Wayne. We'll start with Sam. Sam, what keeps you up at night about Google Analytics?
Oh, can I answer the success question?
No, I'm giving you the other one.
I don't know. I don't think Google Analytics keeps me up at night.
That's the best answer.
Yeah. Can't think of anything that gives me nightmares Google Analytics wise.
Hey, good work-life balance in that case. Wayne, is there anything that really grinds your gears about GA?
It's funny you should mention grinding gears. That's what I feel like my brain goes through. So yeah, I would say something of the sort of really appreciating what we're measuring, and by that I mean, all these disciplines get together, all these roles get together. This utopian kind of world where we have things delineated, which is never going to happen, appropriately so. But I think it not only goes back to what Lee said about the success, being about content. I'm going to go a little deeper than that. What keeps me up at night is, what are people doing about structured content? What can we do better for that to not only help our analytics, but to help the overall user experience? So that's wide-ended, as you would know.
Structured content, yeah, we're going to need a whole separate talk for that, I think. But there's a lot of stuff to cover on that, so maybe we will. Freddie, I know there's one last question. Do you want to pose it to the group?
Yeah, sure. So the last question that we have here is, does anyone take a top task approach to establishing and measuring goals?
We take a top task approach for SEO in terms of, where are people going now, but does that actually reflect everyone in your potential space who could be finding you? Because the thing about like search terms, for instance, is that it's not the complete story, right? It's like, these are the people who could best find your information based on how your site exists now. But what are the synonyms in that topic area? What are other ways to pose the same questions? And if you pose those questions, do you still find you? Or do you still go to the same area? So top task can be a little bit of a misnomer. So it's a good, I think it's a very good tool in an SEO and keyword research kind of aspect, but keeping in mind that it doesn't reflect the full picture until you do that broader keyword research.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight, Sam. I'll give a last second for any of our other speakers if they want to join in and talk about top tasks.
We did that for when we had myra.gov, but we had a lot more contractor assistance with that site than we do now. So we're not doing a lot of that yet, but we do have contractor assistance with USA Spending and Data Labs. So they may be getting into some of that more than the rest of us are.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we are at time, everyone. So I would just like to thank you so much to the folks who joined us today to speak. Sam, Trayshawn, Wayne, and Lee. We really appreciate you taking the time to share these stories. I actually thought this was a fantastic conversation. Very interesting to hear from different points of view across government about these issues. I hope that for the 50 or so that are still with us, that you also were able to take some things away from this conversation. And I think maybe we'll have to try to schedule some more discussions of this sort in the future. I will just note that we will be sending a follow-up that includes a survey. So we'd love to hear your opinions about this sort of discussion format rather than our traditional training. Please fill that out and let us know. And the recording should also be posted on the event page if you'd like other folks or to direct your colleagues to this conversation. So with that, we will close, and I'll just say thanks once again to our speakers, and we hope you have a great week.